Okay.
One of us is prepared.
So, God, when are you going to talk, Karen? Jeez. All right. So insurance and individual legal liability for board members. We get the question fairly often. We know what type of insurance coverage do we have on the board? For me and my, I'm signed up. I'm on the board now. I'm a member. I don't get paid a whole lot to be there, so I want to at least make sure that I'm not going to get sued. So we do have statutory provisions that allow the school board to purchase insurance, which indemnifies, covers liability issues and those sorts of things, both for board members and for employees of the school district. So if you haven't had the discussion yet about your insurance renewal, you will at some point as a new board member. If you're an existing board member, you can kind of help explain this. But boards in general have a couple of pretty good insurance options in Nebraska and that are fairly comprehensive in what they cover. So our purpose with this is not to get into all the specifics of exactly what's covered. You'll have plenty of time to go through that. But just to tell you that if you have questions in that process about whether something is or isn't covered, you've got the statutory authority to buy pretty much whatever insurance that you think is appropriate to indemnify or to prevent against liability. So check with your carrier coverage, ask the superintendent questions about, what is covered, how it's covered. They insurance carriers talk about things a little bit differently, but in general, there should be answers to most of your questions. More good news in this regard, and this is one that we get whenever we're doing like hot topics presentations and we talk about how board members got sued. There are actually very few times in state or federal law when an individual board member, both in your official or in your personal capacity, that sort of lawsuit might ever actually result in you as the person, the board member, paying money because of the, congratulations, you've been elected to the school board. One of those is if you employ a teacher without a certificate. And so this is straight from Nebraska statute. It talks about the inability to employ a teacher for the purpose of teaching, as that's defined if they don't have a certificate. And if you do, you could be personally liable for the money that you paid in salary and benefits to that teacher. The second is if you use, for personal reasons, something like the school's tax exemption. And we've had it happen several times where a board member orders something off of Amazon and it was through the school and it turns out the board member took that piece of equipment home or something like that. It could be intentional, it could be unintentional, but just understand that if you are getting a personal benefit from the use of the school's tax exemption, that is a problem. So, again, especially if you're a new board member, those purchasing procedures should be fairly clear, but that's a good question to ask.
It's not worth the risk of saving $20. It's also a crime and you can be charged criminally. And they are getting more and more interested in the wrongful use of those certificates. So please be careful.
Yep. Section 1983, that's a federal law that says if somebody acting under the color of the state does something which causes some sort of deprivation of rights or harm to another individual, that is something where you could have personal liability. And I don't know if you want to drop in, Steve, the case that we were talking about earlier.
Oh, we had a case out of the East Coast. Now I forget where it was from. Carolinas, maybe.
Somewhere south.
But it was politically motivated, and as I recall, Democrats had been in charge and Republicans got on board, or vice versa. And they were out to get employees who were rooting for or supporting the other side, and they intentionally violated people's rights and made very callous comments, and it was very clear what their motive was. And so they were hit with some personal liability in the amounts of $100,000, $150,000. And so it's very, very rare, but it does happen.
Yeah. The last one that we'd highlight real quickly is especially under state tort law. So if you do something that causes damages, an intentional violation of a clearly established right. For example, I don't care that we have the First Amendment. We're going to punish every kid that says something we don't like. It is possible that could be both a Section 1983 and a Nebraska state law claim by that student or that teacher to exercise their First Amendment right. So if you know that you'd be violating the law by moving forward with that decision, seek legal advice, because we'll probably...
Be things like, we don't hire women.
Right.
We don't care. We don't hire African Americans. I mean, it's going to be something outrageous.
That's right. It has to be clearly established and you have to know it, right? So you probably know that students that mouth off, you don't get to punch them in the face, at least not east of Kearney. So if you are a board member and you're walking through the school with the principal someday and some kid spouts off and you punch him in the face, yeah, they can sue you personally for that because you know that kid has a right not to be hit in the face. So that's a silly example. But the long and short of it is, for the most part, you're probably either not potentially liable or you're covered by the district's insurance plans.